You are now up streaming live on YouTube.
Great. Thank you, Pat.
Good evening to everyone joining on Zoom. Um, Not quite at 6 o'clock yet. We'll be getting started here in a couple minutes, so just hold tight. We'll wait for some others to show up. Thanks for being here. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Montana River Recreation Management Workshop. This is our second workshop in the series of 3 workshops that we'll be hosting. Public virtual workshops to elicit public comment, public input for river recreation management across the state of Montana, guiding the future management of the resource and the experience. I am joined here tonight. My name is Liam Harry. I'm the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Planner for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I'm joined here by Amber Lopatine, who is also a part of the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Division. I'm also joined by Deb O'Neill, acting administrator for POR, as well as 3 recreation managers specific to the Blackfoot, the Smith, and the Missouri rivers across the state. Colin, Chrissy, and Cannon. We'll hear from them a little bit later on here in the presentation. So yeah, this is our second workshop. We'll be providing you kind of an upfront process here. This is our agenda for the evening. For the first 30 minutes or so, we'll be presenting some information, kind of some background information on river recreation across the state of Montana, specific to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We will have this workshop recorded, and it will be recorded, and then there will be a link available online to review for your reference after the workshop completes. You can find all of that on the webpage for the River Recreation Advisory Council webpage, which is probably where you found the link to join the Zoom this evening. So, as I mentioned, this is our second workshop. We're gathering input on river recreation management across the state. I'll start with, we've got our staff introductions. We'll start with a process design, public engagement pieces, how we're approaching these workshops, how we're approaching the overall River Recreation Advisory Council process. We'll dive a little bit into the legislative and regulatory framework, a little bit of the background on river recreation management with FWP, and a little bit of the history, as well as what management looks like today, some of the tools and methods that we use to make some of the decisions we make around river recreation management. We'll get into a few examples of how what current management looks like across the state with those example rivers. And then we'll dive into the public input and discussion and the reason that we're here today, and the reason that we want to hear from you, what your thoughts are around river recreation management, some of those challenges, some of the current issues that you're seeing out there, and to elicit that feedback, we'll be using a platform called Mentimeter, short for Menti, and we'll get into some of those instructions once we get there. We'll also leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So if you have any additional questions that we might be able to answer, we'll be able to provide some time there. There is the ability, if you have any questions that come up while we're presenting the information, or as we start to dive into the public input piece, you can add those questions in the chat. We as panelists and co-hosts will be able to see those. We can get back to you. You'll also see links being added to the chat as well that you can access throughout the presentation. So, without further ado, I'm going to move forward here and give you a little bit of kind of the purpose, not only for the RRAC, but the workshops themselves. We're here to share and collect information from the public on their river recreation experience, identifying some of these trends and challenges around recreation management in Montana. And the information collected from these workshops will be collected, summarized, and into a report for the River Recreation Advisory Council. The River Recreation Advisory Council, their purpose is to develop a portfolio of ideas and a set of recommendations to the department for future considerations of river recreation management. And I'll get into a little more about the background of RRAC here in a little bit. When we're thinking about the scope and the focus, the focus of this process is extensive department lands, Class 1 waters, and similar rivers that provide these recreation opportunities under the authority of FWP. So this includes recreation use on and along these waterways, and including the fishing access sites. A little background on the process design and public engagement. Phase one of the process is identifying and forming the Recreation Advisory Council. So we sent out recruiting for applications starting July 2nd. Those closed on August 2nd. We are seeking 12 applications. Those applicants are in review at this time. And we're hoping to have those identified here in the next couple of weeks. At the stage we're at right now, we are soliciting input from the public at these virtual workshops. So this is the second of that third, as I mentioned. And then we will be providing a river recreation survey broadly to those who, from the contacts we've received here through the workshops, as well as a little broader to some of the stakeholder groups around the state. That survey should be available sometime next week. You can find the link to that survey. It will be available through the River Recreation Advisory Council webpage on FWP. After we solicit some of the input, we'll compile the information from both the workshops and that survey, and those will be presented to the RRAC. The RRAC will then convene sometime in mid-October, 16th to 18th, and at which point they will formulate the recommendations. And then the final phase here is that the RRAC will then present the final recommendations that they come up with after their in-person meetings in mid-October, present those to the public. We'll allow for public comment at that time, and then present the public comment in addition to the recommendations from the RRAC to the department by mid-December. So that's a little background on kind of the process and the design of our engagement here with the public. A little bit about the legislative and regulatory framework. The FWP Commission regulates recreation use on public waters, has broad authority of balancing the public access, opportunity, and resource protection of these resources. There's a list of some of the statutory authority and commission rulemaking and department authority that we have to make these decisions around river recreation management. There are links available that will be put in the chat if you want to dive into a little bit more of these. But as you can see on the screen, there are a number of broad authority and rulemaking that allows the department to have authority in terms of making river recreation management decisions. So I want to give a kind of broader overview as well of what the landscape around river recreation management looks like in Montana. This is a map that depicts access sites as well as land management across the state. The brown circles are fishing access sites. Those are owned and managed by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We also have a number of those upside down triangles, which are BLM, so Bureau of Land Management. There are also throughout the state, you can see Forest Service, so those small little trees. Those are U.S. Forest Service managed access points along the river systems across Montana. So this is just to give you an idea of what it looks like. We'd work with agencies across the state around river recreation management. And many of those times we're working with these different agencies to cooperate on that, create partnerships around managing these spaces. So a little background on river recreation management. About the 60s and 70s, we started to see fishing access sites being established. At this time, we have about 338 across the state, as you saw in the last map. In 1985, the Montana Stream Access Law was put in place and allowed the public use of waters for water-based recreation. In 2004, statewide river recreation rules were adopted by the commission. This helped guide the agency in how we make and determine river recreation management decisions. And then as part of a study in 2016, we started to see some of the trends change. We're starting to see, of course, increased use, diverse use of diverse activities, and starting to approach management by providing equitable opportunity. We started seeing in 51% of the FAS usage did not involve angling and started to involve non-fishing activities as well. So we started to see a much more diverse crowd at fishing access sites specifically. As we started to think about our approach, we are guided by the statewide river recreation rules, kind of development of specific management plans and regulations for rivers and access sites. So there are a number of rivers across the state that have very specific rules, as well as permitting in place for those rivers. There's 7 rivers across the state that have those kind of specialized rules and permitting. Here is a map of what that looks like. You can see that there are a number of rivers. These 7 rivers have these special restrictions. So in some cases, commercial permits that are limited or not limited, public and commercial permits that are limited, or a wild and scenic river designation, which is federally managed by the U.S. Forest Service. And so this is just a broad overview of what some of these special cases are around river recreation management. And we'll dive a little bit more into those with the recreation managers providing some additional information on those here in a little bit. So what does river recreation management look like today, and what do we use? What are the tools and methods that we use here as an agency, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks? One of those primary pieces is that we identify staff information, education, try to increase staff presence in those high use areas, thorough data collection, user education, so signage and maps where available. We have permit systems and licenses in place. As most of you or some of you might be aware, the conservation license was put in place a couple of years ago. That's a part of our ability to kind of identify spaces where those who are using those sites will need a license. We have fishing licenses, commercial use permits, as well as fishing access site permits for guides and other commercial use as well. We have agreements and coordination. As I mentioned, we work across agencies. We also work with nonprofits, private landowners, other 8 entities across the state with different agreements and collaborative approaches to river recreation management. In addition to that, we do have some specific river management plans for specific rivers. The Smith River and the Blackfoot are examples of that. We'll hear a little bit more about those. We also have the FWP Montana River Recreation Planning Manual. This is a department manual that guides how we proceed with processes around planning rivers, managing for those rivers, the engagement process similar to what is in place now, what we're engaging with as well right now. We also have a lot of data collection and use monitoring. We have a number of examples that vary across the state of what type of data is collected at each river, as well as what is monitored. But in general, we have a number of fisheries data that's been collected for quite some time now. We do have those permitting and licensing information, as well as some commercial use reporting data on various rivers, as well as camera and vehicle counter data, in-person surveys, and of course, public comment from any of these processes that we engage with. So that's a little bit of what management looks like today. Just for a quick little break here, I'm going to play a video. This is just going to give you kind of a
Montana is home to some of the most diverse and renowned rivers on Earth. Rivers and streams write the story of Montana, from the Badlands of the Missouri Breaks to the towering cliffs of the Smith, the forested banks and mountainous backdrop of the Blackfoot, and crystal clear waters of the Flathead, rich with biodiversity, sanctuaries for wildlife, and opportunities for recreation. A storied history of native culture, prospectors, and explorers evolved to legendary fly fishing, floating, adventure, and excitement. Serene flat water, blue ribbon trout streams, deep canyons, and raging whitewater attract visitors from across the world. Lifelong memories are made here. Camaraderie with friends, the thrill of adventure, and spectacular scenery rejuvenate the soul. Your actions to help preserve our majestic rivers will be rewarded with an unforgettable experience in the last best place.
That is a quick video. It's a series of videos that were put together about a couple years ago that we've worked with BBS and some partners to pull together some information as well as kind of guide river recreation use across the state. This is just one of those three videos. It just gives a broad sense of what river recreation is like in Montana, the broad spectrum of what's available out there, what are the opportunities. And so I hope that kind of elicited some feelings, some, emotions, some thoughts around river recreation in Montana. What's some of those images there that might bring out some of your thoughts as we start to dive into the public input piece of this. And so we'll kind of dive in here to some of the current management in practice. We'll have three presenters, three recreation managers presenting kind of along the spectrum of methods and kind of tools used at each of these specific river systems, some of the opportunities, experiences, and how they kind of differ. We'll have the Missouri River, the Blackfoot River, and the Smith River each presented on, a little background on each of them, kind of what the specific rules are, or the rules that might not be in place, or the limits that might not be in place, and how they differ throughout the state. And so these are just some kind of example case studies that will help kind of frame the conversation as we dive into the discussion questions and the public input. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Colin Moss, and he is our Smith River Recreation Manager. Colin, feel free to take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Liam, and good evening to everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight and joining us for this second of three workshops. Again, my name is Colin Moss. I'm the Recreation Manager for the Smith River. I also manage another state park called Sluiceboxes State Park. As Liam mentioned in the previous slide, or in this current slide that is showing, the Smith River kind of falls on one end of the spectrum of a more probably heavy management as far as fish, wildlife, and parks is concerned for rivers. And these specific rules and regulations and use limits were pretty much a progression over time of actions that occurred. And one of the first actions occurred in 1986, where Fish, Wildlife, and Parks actually funded a study. It was called the Smith River Study. And out of that study came some future management recommendations. And then that led to 2 years later, in 1988, the very first management plan on the Smith River. And a lot of those recommendations from the 1986 study were then implemented into the management plan, which then eventually led to what's called the Smith River Management Act in 1989. And so the Smith River Management Act was a specific law that was passed in the 1989 legislature that gave a little more specific responsibility to Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to manage the Smith River specifically. And so the purpose or the intent of this act was provide continued recreational and commercial use and enjoyment of the Smith River consistent with its capacity, seek ways to minimize conflicts between river users and the private landowners on the river, and lastly, protect the integrity of the river's water and canyon resources for future generations. This act was applicable to Camp Baker or to the Smith River, beginning at the Camp Baker put-in, all the way to the confluence of the Missouri River. For those of you that are familiar with the Smith River, currently we just manage the recreational use between Camp Baker and Eden Bridge, but we do have authority to manage it all the way to the confluence. It also kind of spelled out some management responsibilities for the Smith River in a plan, and those were to allow the continuation of compatible existing recreational and public land uses, maintain the opportunity to enjoy the natural scenic beauty and solitude, and lastly, to conserve the fish, wildlife, scientific, and recreational values within the corridor. Again, it granted rulemaking authority to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And then lastly, it also allocated user fees and created what's called the Corridor Enhancement Account, which specifies where specific fees are to be spent, whether it's for operations or for specific earmarked purposes. Next slide, please. And so after the passage of the Smith River Act, there was a progression of management actions that were taken that kind of started out with some less restrictive and slowly to more restrictive rules and regulations that were implemented. And this occurred during the early to mid 1990s. And so what we have in present day restrictions for the Smith River, kind of jumping ahead to present day, you know, it started out with voluntary registration, then be mandatory registration. Nowadays, we have a mandatory lottery drawing, and that's for private floaters only. Beginning this year, non-residents were limited to 20% of the actual permits that are allocated. And then also what was new this year is applicants would have the ability to purchase a bonus point every year. 9 launches are allowed per day. That includes both private and commercially outfitted groups. A maximum of 15 people per group. Again, that's both for private and outfitted. Commercial outfitters are capped at 73 launches per year, and they operate off of what's called a permanent launch calendar. And then they have specific numbers of launches on days of the week they can do. On Sundays and Wednesdays, they're allowed 2 of the 9 launches. And then on the other 5 days of the week, they're allowed 1 of the 9 launches. And then there is a 4-night maximum stay limit during the peak season, which is defined as May 15th to July 15th. Next slide, please. And as Liam mentioned earlier, a lot of what we do is data collection. So prior to, you know, the regulations and the Smith River becoming a permitted river, there was a lot of data that was collected. And to this day, we still do collect a lot of data. And the 3 main areas where data is collected is, you know, right off the bat from our licensing division, from the lottery that's conducted every year. So we know how many residents and non-residents apply, how many drew, what their age and genders are, for example. And then a good chunk of our statistics and data that we collect come from the registration forms and in the floater logs, things like user days, user nights, what type of use the boat camps are getting, again, residents versus non-residents, the numbers of floaters with all our different user types, user groups. And then on the floater logs, we collect quite a bit of additional information in addition to the registration forms, you know, satisfaction, crowding questions, how far did you float? We have a qualitative indicator where we ask, you know, how many boats did you see while floating the river today, and how did you feel about that? And then overall satisfaction, to just name a few of the things that we ask in the floater logs. So that concludes my presentation for the Smith River. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And then we'll go ahead and pass it off to Chrissy. She's the Blackfoot Recreation Manager, and give a good overview of what recreation management looks like there over at the Blackfoot.
Good evening. Thanks for being here. My name is Chrissy O'Shell, and I'm the Blackfoot Recreation Manager. I'm here tonight mostly to talk about the specific aspects of the Blackfoot that have regulations on them. There are only 2 areas on the Blackfoot that actually have any kind of a regulation. One of Western Montana's most popular rivers is by far the Blackfoot River, mostly for angling. Back to the 1960s, we have documentation of heavy angling use, both wade angling and float angling. There's a rich history of recreation on the Blackfoot, but there's also some negative reports going back to the 1960s of private landowners having issues with anglers trespassing and some issues with recreation conflict in between users. What came out of kind of that problem, and it occurred around 1976, was an agreement among landowners and agencies, basically landowners in the recreation corridor, which is defined now as the area on the Blackfoot from Russell Gates fishing access site down to Johns Rood fishing access site. And the basics of that form of regulation are really unique. Again, it's an agreement more than it is a regulation, but in 2015, it was actually made a rule. And so I have the number up there for you. So the river recreation corridor has a couple rules. In that section of river, you are not allowed to camp within the ordinary high water mark wherever you want. We supply float-in campsites that we take care of, and we maintain, and there are very strict regulations on what you can do in those, when including fires and human waste. You also cannot have fires outside of a fire pan, and now we're also requiring fire blankets, and no glass in the river recreation corridor. And sort of in exchange to the public, and recognizing that there is private land all along the Blackfoot River, recognizing that wade anglers would still like to use that area within the high water mark and maybe even a little further to be able to have a picnic, travel along the river for wade angling, whatever it may be. And so there's an extra 50 feet of travel corridor, as we refer to it as, in the recreation corridor for recreationists to use on private land. That is the first regulation on the Blackfoot, and the second is our special recreation permit, which I'm going to get into detail on the next slide. The Blackfoot River has 27 fishing access sites, and in 10 are campgrounds, and then we have 8 floating campsites. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our special recreation permit, it comes out of an earlier management plan, but it's backed up by the 2010 management plan, and also in rule. It requires anyone who is doing commercial or organized use on the river to get what is called a special recreation permit. That requires them to, if they do any fishing in their business with commercial use or organized use, the commercial use has to have an outfitter's license. They also have to hold insurance, and they have to name both us as a state agency, and it is a cooperative special recreation permit with the Bureau of Land Management. And so they also have to list them on their insurance. We also require a payment. It is 3% of their gross revenue, and the BLM requires a minimum payment of $115. And again, that's a mutual agreement that we have with the BLM. The 2010 management plan set up reaches on the river, which helps with management, both in experience and also being able to administer the special recreation permit. So that it does follow those reaches, and that is how the outfitters report their information to us at the end. And that's probably one of the most valuable parts. It is the most valuable part of the special recreation permit. It has no limits. It does not allocate use. It does not cap use. And it currently is available to anyone who has those requirements met. So the best part of it is the reports that we get at the end that tell us where the outfitted use is, so that we can track it and understand where that use might be and where might be shifting. Next slide, please. And so to support both the management plan and the special recreation permit, we do monitoring and data collection. We do in-person surveys on the river every year. We've been doing them since 2006. We keep a lot of the data consistent so that we have trends, but we also change it. It's for subject matter that might be useful to the department or to the Bureau of Land Management, who we also cooperate with on the surveying. We also do camera monitoring so that we are able to go back and we have a recreation technician who looks at our camera data and counts the watercraft for us. And then we are able to, we know our commercial use from the reports from the special recreation permit. And then we can basically subtract that commercial use from the total and then get a non-commercial number of boats on the river, which is really hard to obtain. And it's a very good estimate of use on the river. And we also use traffic counters. And then again, as I mentioned, the SRP data is crucial. Next slide, please. So what's changing on the Blackfoot, I think is really important to address in terms of where our future might be going. We are seeing a diversification of use. We are seeing basically 50-50 in terms of scenic and angling. And that number, the amount of angling has decreased a little bit and the amount of scenic has been increasing incrementally over the years. So we are also seeing a large diversity of types of watercraft. There have been tubes really high up on the Blackfoot upstream that we don't normally see. So that goes back to the management plan where we talk about the desired experience in each reach. And it's questionable, that the uses are compatible at this point as we're seeing stand-up paddle boards, tubes in the upper reaches of the Blackfoot. So a diversification of use, and then also rising use numbers that have, after COVID, they have leveled out. And so that's what our most recent data is showing us. I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Chrissy. And we'll go ahead and hop on over to Cannon Colgrove, the Recreation Manager for the Missouri River.
Thank you, Liam. And thanks everyone for your attendance tonight and participation throughout this process. My name is Cannon Colgrove. I'm a Recreation Manager out of Region 4, the Great Falls region, and I primarily manage the fishing access sites across Region 4. On the Missouri River, we have 16 public access sites. One of these sites is managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and the other 15 are Fish, Wildlife, and Parks fishing access sites. 10 of these fishing access sites offer camping along that corridor stretch from Holter Dam down to Cascade. Next slide, Liam. Unlike the Blackfoot River and the Smith River, the Missouri River does not issue any permits for recreational use, private use, or commercial use on the Missouri River. And we don't allocate any of the use on the Missouri River in this section either. Next slide. I just wanted to highlight two things on the Missouri River. FWP has a program called the Private Lands Fishing Access Agreements. And what this is it's an agreement between the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and private landowners to allow public fishing access. And on the Missouri River, we have a partnership with a landowner, basically from Holter Dam all the way down to Craig along the frontage road, where the landowner has entered into an agreement with the department to allow public access to the river through private property. That landowner is compensated by the department to allow that access on a 5-year term, and we help manage that access with signage and maps like you can see here on this slide, and that's year-round access for the public. Next slide, Liam. The other thing I wanted to highlight about the Missouri River, although the department does not collect data to the level of the Blackfoot River or Smith River, we do have a recreation plan that's developed by Northwestern Energy. They prepare this Missouri Madison Comprehensive Plan to help document and fulfill Project 2188, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license for their 9 hydropower developments along the Missouri and Madison River in Montana. What this plan does is it helps facilitate collaboration and communication amongst the various government agencies throughout the Missouri and Madison River corridors. But this plan does not set public policy, and it also does not create requirements for managers to follow or implement. But the plan is good because it provides a level of recreation data that otherwise the department is not collecting. It also provides some information from visitor use surveys that Northwestern Energy conducts along the Missouri River. It guides funding for recreation projects and fishing access site developments. And it outlines resources and recreation site concerns along the Missouri River. And if you want to learn more information about this recreation plan or some of the data that Northwestern Energy has collected along the Missouri River, you can view that website at the bottom there, northwesternenergy.com/recreation. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you, Cannon, Chrissy, and Colin. That's very good information and kind of a little bit background on kind of the uniqueness of each of the river systems that were presented there. We have, a number of river systems across the state, as was mentioned. Each of those were a bit unique in the way that they're managed, different collaborations, different cooperations between other agencies, entities as well, different types of data that's collected. And so as we start to jump into the Mentimeter and the discussion and public input here, here in the workshop, I want you to kind of think about all of those kind of methods, all those resources that are used, those types of ways that we manage different rivers across the state and kind of apply that to a statewide level. And so thinking about all those rivers across the state, not just those three, maybe the one that's right in your backyard, maybe the one that's across this, on the east side. And so kind of keeping that in mind. We will be using Mentimeter. Menti is a software program that allows us to gather and collect public input kind of anonymously. You'll be able to actively input information, your comments on the screen. I'll give you a little bit of instruction here in just a minute. If you do have any verbal comments that you would like to have presented, you can just raise your hand. We have someone tracking the raised hand option. We'll go ahead and unmute you, and then at that point you can speak. As mentioned, the scope here is the Class 1 waters and similar rivers, kind of with the capacity of river recreation use. And as you're aware, comments are not recorded as formal public comment, but we do really want to hear what you have to say. This is your opportunity to express your thoughts on river recreation management, how it affects your experience, what are some opportunities or solutions that you might have in mind. And we really want to hear what you have to say, because this will be going to the RAC in a report to give them a good baseline of information around what they should be looking at in terms of their recommendations for the department in terms of river recreation management. And so here are the instructions for getting onto Menti. So if you're on a desktop, you can go ahead and plug in www.menti.com. It'll show you a screen to just enter the code. Otherwise, if you'd like to do it through the mobile version, you can use the QR code. Go ahead and scan the QR code. I'll give you a minute here so you can kind of get to that first initial screen. And please reach out to any of us. You can either do that through the chat if you have any issues with getting access to the Menti. And like I said, this is your opportunity. I really want to emphasize this chance that we have. Obviously, you're interested and engaged already by being here this evening. We just really would like to start this conversation. We're willing to open it up. And so we'll have kind of 6 to 7 questions off to start with. Each of those questions will kind of be word bubbles. And so they'll appear on the screen as you input your information. And then we will kind of work into a few more discussion-based questions where we're hoping to hear from you both verbally as well as providing some comment as well as we get into those questions, and I'll guide you all along through this process. So I'll give you about 15 more seconds here to make sure you're all connected here to the Menti.
Hey, Leo, we do have a raised hand from Mike. I'm gonna allow him to talk.
Thank you.
Mike, you should be good to unmute.
How's that? Am I coming through?
Yep, we
You
can
are.
hear you.
I have two questions. My first one is how many people are in attendance tonight? But the other thing, I am a Smith River outfitter for 30 years. I was a Blackfoot River permit holder. I'm currently a Big Bull, Beaverhead, and Madison River holder. And I truly believe the focus of recreation in this state also has to have, you also have to join this with conservation and getting water, or everything we're going to talk about is falling. The Blackfoot right now, I think is at 380, 386 CFS. I think it was another truncated season on the Smith River. We are on the Big Hole, and on the lower, at the high bridge on the Big Hole, the CFS is 60 and the entire river is closed. So my recommendation is primarily you need to raise revenue, and that revenue needs to be shared with the conservation program, whether it's to assist in the fishery or assist in getting water, or again, everything we're talking about is all falling. And if you don't have a partnership, if parks cannot partner with the fisheries division, it's at the detriment of the citizens of Montana. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, appreciate that input there, and we'll have that opportunity to share as we kind of move through these questions. So feel free to add that information into the chat as we ask these kind of prompting questions. Appreciate you speaking up, and as we move along, if other things come up, any other attendees here. And to answer your first question, we have about 25 participants this evening. So a good showing. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the first question, and this is just the first question that you'll have unlimited responses for these first six or so questions. Go ahead and you can, if you're following along in the Menti, you can plug in the type of what river recreation activities do you participate in across the state. So this could be anything broad from, as you're aware, fishing and rafting are coming up, sightseeing. There's a lot of activities that happen not only on the river, but along the river as well. And so I want you to think about what that is to you, what's important to you, what activities do you engage with. And as these start to kind of show up, you'll start to see the word bubble of those that are most frequently inputted. Probably start to see a spectrum of other activities and some of that diversification that we're seeing across river recreation. That's not just the angling use that was managed for, in years past, and starting to see a lot more of this diversified use. I'll give you about 30 more seconds as you kind of start to think about more than just those primary activities, as if there's other things that bring you to the river, what kind of motivates you to get to the river? What is it, that activity that really gets you there and keeps you there? Great. Well, that was just kind of our first initial get you kind of familiar with how Menti works. So hopefully that helps you kind of the functionality of everything. We're going to move on to the next question here. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to raise your hands or post anything in the comments as well, or in the chat. So what aspects of river recreation experience do you enjoy the most? So in this type of question, we're asking, what is it about the rivers that drives you to them? What is it that motivates you? What is it that you enjoy the most out of that experience? And once again, there should be an unlimited number of options here. And so if there's something that really identifies with you about why you enjoy it, be very helpful to hear what you have to say as well. If anyone wants to start a discussion as things come up around what's showing up on the screen as well, if you'd like to have a deeper discussion about that. A lot of nature, quiet, some of the solitude aspects, being able to experience kind of that natural beauty seen up here on the screen, some of that disconnection, escape, see challenge on there, which is a unique enjoyment as well. Vlogging, nice.
I'd like to add, Liam, doesn't look like all attendees have signed up on Menti, so we've only been getting responses from about half the people. So just a reminder on how to join, you could go to menti.com and use that code if you didn't scan, but we'd love you to participate in this.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, it's at the top there in the white, you can go to menti.com and just use that code. Once you get to menti.com, 2526-3490, and it'll take you straight to the screen that's currently being presented on and the question that's being asked. Give just about 10 more seconds here for any additional responses or anyone who's kind of just hopping in. Once again, if you have any additional questions, any additional comments that you'd like to expand on, please feel free to raise your hand. All right, I'm going to go ahead and head to the next question here. So similar to the last question, but this time we want to kind of understand what aspects of river recreation experience do you enjoy the least? What are some of the things that, you know, you wake up in the morning, you're not quite looking forward to having to witness or be a part of when you head to the river? Things when you're on the river, once you get there, what is it that, you know, you're witnessing? What are you seeing out there that something you might not enjoy? Thinking about those aspects of, you know, what are those conflicts, what are those issues that surround kind of river recreation and that experience that you're having. See that crowds, yeah, number of people has an impact on a lot of your experiences, certainly pollution and some of these natural features as well, fish kills, some of these environmental pieces as well, some of the behaviors of others as well. And feel free to, yeah, kind of brainstorm what it is. I see a lot of connection around from the first question, or what you enjoy, and kind of some of that solitude and quiet, kind of that natural experience that we get when being out on rivers, and some of this kind of comparison here of, you know, where crowds and some of these overcrowding can kind of be prohibiting to that. I'll give about 10 more seconds here. Add any more comments or any other statements here. Wonderful. Thanks for everyone being a part of this. And once again, feel free to speak up. I'm going to move along to the next question here. This question's getting a little more specific to what types of information is useful and necessary for you to engage in river recreation activities. So I want you to think about your time spent on Montana rivers. How do you currently collect information? Is that useful? Is it the information that you need? Where do you get that information? What types of information is that? And so is it, when you're thinking about fisheries information, crowds, what is it that you need to know about for you to have a successful kind of experience or an enjoyable experience? See permits needed has come up there. And if there's anyone who wants to kind of expand on that, just working through the agency, what, we talked about a number of these different permitting systems across the states. What is it that these, what is it about the stream flows? I see that's a really important piece there as well, CFS. Understanding what those stream flows are. Obviously you can't float a river without the water, so that's essential. And then, yeah, this is a great variety here. Yeah, if there's anybody who would like to expand on any of their added comments here, feel free to raise your hand. We can always start that discussion. We do still have about 40 minutes, so we have plenty of time to kind of dive a little deeper into some of these responses. Safety information. Yeah, I see a couple up there around parking as well. Some of this AIS and noxious weed information as well. I think these are all really important pieces to knowing, not only preparing yourself before you head out to the river, but also having that ability to kind of have a positive experience when you're once you are there.
Hey, Liam, we have a raised hand from Trevor. I'm gonna allow him to talk. Trevor, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, am I on?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. My name is Trevor Anderson. I am a fishing outfitter here out of Missoula. I've been guiding in the Missoula area for 13 plus years and fly fishing all my life. And I think if I'm correct, that was Mike Geary earlier that was talking about stream flows. And I just definitely want to second what he said, that I think going forward, and it's obviously, very complex situation with climate change. And then obviously the other elephant in the room, in my opinion, is, draw from rivers, irrigation, whether it's all the new housing Montana's experienced, or irrigation draw just in general. I think that, going forward with climate change, that is going to be the number one thing that really matters for all river recreation users, is finding a way, and obviously compromise, will need to happen. But finding a way to manage stream flows for healthy river systems year round. Because it definitely seems like lately, every time now we get to mid-July and onwards, it's just a whole different ecosystem out there, these rivers, compared to even when I started guiding 13 years ago, or even really 7 or 8 years ago. So I think, going forward, to me, stream flows and finding a way to keep water in the rivers, is probably the biggest thing, that we need to focus on.
Thank you, Trevor. Yeah, I appreciate your input there. And if that those comments there rings with any other additional thoughts, ideas, I think we do have a few other raised hands here. I was correct there. Amber, did you see another raised hand as well?
Yep, give me 1 second. All right, Sean, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, hello, my name's Sean Jazanka. I'm here in Dillon, Montana. I'm a Beaverhead Big Hole permitted outfitter. I'm kind of going to be preaching to the choir here. It sounds like listening to Mike and Trevor speak. But while we talk about managing river usage, it's what we're seeing in Southwest Montana is that we're seeing a congestion of people because we have so many miles where people are basically unable to recreate. We have the entire Big Hole River closed. We have water coming out of the river to go onto fields where crops have been harvested. Yet the general public might not understand that the reason that 100 plus miles of river that we're unable to recreate on now is because of that. So I can't emphasize that enough. I own Frontier Anglers Fly Shop in Dillon, Montana. If anyone would like to get in touch with me, I'm advocating for a minimum stream flow ballot initiative. Obviously, it won't be this year, but it's kind of high time in Montana that we take care of our resources so that we all have a quality experience and we'll be able to absorb more people if those resources are functioning well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, appreciate your input there and continuing this conversation. I'm gonna been on this screen here. Hopefully everyone's got the opportunity to input their answers here for this question. I'm gonna go ahead and move along to the next question that we have here. So this question is asking kind of what specific communication channels are best for reaching river recreationists. So we kind of touched base on what type of information you're seeking, and now we're kind of hoping to identify what are those channels that are best to reach river recreationists. We have a lot of channels currently being used at this time, but what are some of those that are the most useful for you as a river recreationist? What are the ones that you use most often before or while you're out in the river? And if there's any specific sites, anything like that, feel free to note those as well. Any ones that you're using specifically for identifying some of those, information types that you need. I know there's a lot of information out there. So what are those channels that, seem to be functioning best for you in your river recreation experience?
I just want to say that questions like this are going to be really important for the advisory council that we're putting together. We'll be reporting to them on all of these questions. But I hope you guys all hang on for the last two questions. That's really the meat of this. And I think we'll be both having a really good, robust conversation around these last two questions that Liam's going to be asking, and just really encourage you guys to unmute when we get to those questions so we could have a good discussion and be able to submit a really robust report to the advisory council when they are convened.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, these type of questions are pretty specific, and so they really do help guide, and will be really helpful for the River Recreation Advisory Council when they convene. And getting your input here gives us kind of an array of options to present to them, kind of what the spectrum of opportunities and channels here that they should be considering. So I'll give about 10 more seconds to add any final thoughts here for this question. We'll move on to the next one. And as Deb mentioned, the last two, so if you're would really like you to stick around because those two should be really exciting. We have a little set up differently, but kind of move on to this next question here. So once again, a pretty specific question, but are there any specific emerging trends or technologies that you think could benefit river recreation management? We have a lot of information out there. We've talked about some of these communication or information types. We've talked about some of these channels for receiving that information. But what is kind of some of these new technologies, any emerging trends around bringing out information? So it could be information, it could be on the rivers, it could be information prior to getting to the river. What would benefit you in improving your river recreation experience? I see mapping software is one of those. At the department, we do provide mapping. Is it to an extent, at certain sites we have maps up and signage as well. Is there something, some additional technology that might help enhance that information? Car counters, vehicle counters. And you can kind of think about this as well as processes a little bit as well. So yeah, process-based restoration is listed there. Thinking about processes for permitting, processes for getting information, these some of the rules and regulations that are out there. Thinking about what technologies might be out there for us to kind of better inform, us as an agency for collecting information, better inform you as a recreationist on these rivers. Wonderful. I'll give about 10 more seconds here to add in any more comments here. Please do raise your hand if you'd like to expand on any of these. I'd like to hear, I see some very unique and responses here. So if anyone wants to expand on those, feel free to raise your hand. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and move on to this next question. This question, we're going to kind of start diving into these more open-ended responses here. And so you will have up to 200 characters to kind of respond, and we'll be able to kind of full comment, a little more open-ended here. And so this is where we'd really like to start hearing, a little bit more about the discussion of what is presented here on the screen. And so, do the restrictions on river use impact your recreation experience? And if so, how? So what is it about restrictions, any limitations on a river, and how is that affecting your experience, whether positively or negatively, or if not at all? If you'd like to, as you're kind of answering this question, thinking about if it is a positive or negative or kind of neutral impact on your experience, if you want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into how it impacts that experience, feel free to include that in the response. And I know these are a little, allows for a little more lengthy response, so take a little bit of time here. really appreciate everyone's thoughts and input here, and staying positive and working through some of these questions. I know they can be difficult to come up with, and seen some great responses in terms of kind of the spectrum of who we have here on the Zoom here tonight. You know, we have a lot of different variety of uses, and so it's really nice to see that broad spectrum being presented here. We have about 30 more seconds here. Kind of work through this question, and then we'll move on to the next one. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do get kicked off of Menti at any point, the code is up at the top of the screen there. So if you need to link back in, you can do that by going to menti.com and using the code there at the top. And as was mentioned earlier as well, kind of scroll down here as we start to receive some more responses here. And it's mentioned before, the next two questions are ones that we'd really like to start engaging a conversation around. They are set up a little bit different. They are open-ended responses, but we will allow for time for people to respond. And then we'll actually move to a next screen where you can vote kind of on the responses that are put up on the screen. And so kind of get a crowdsourced way of identifying some of these next questions, kind of what are some of the priorities here within this group. Great. I'm going to go ahead and hop onto the next question here. And as I mentioned, these will have responses here. So how can management address conflicting interests between recreational users? So kind of seeking out some solutions, some ideas around how we can address conflict between users. Could be user types or among similar uses, and starting to think about that. And once we have a number of responses up on the screen, we'll be able to move to the next slide, and you'll be able to kind of vote on ones that you've kind of find to be conflicting as well. And so it'll kind of crowdsource and integrate everyone's responses. And you can kind of think back to some of the presentation on some of the tools and methods we currently use at FWP. If you've been, recreated in other states, other areas around the country, what are those kind of methods and management tools that they use to address this? Is there anything unique or some unique novel ideas that you have that you think would be helpful in addressing some of these conflicts?
Just a reminder again, if you don't feel like typing in and you want to engage in conversation about this, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the screen here. If anyone wants to speak up on the kind of engaging of the public and the education piece, it's come up in our past workshop as well. If anyone wants to expand on kind of the role and how that would address conflict, feel free to raise your hand. some of these education pieces, some collaboration. Some of these, public engagement processes. Give about 30 more seconds here to add any more additional comments here. I'm hopeful that it'll function where we can get to kind of the voting page here. See if we can get the functionality here of the voting. Hopeful that might work. Any last comments? Give you about 10 more seconds here. I'm going to try and hopefully see here if we can get to the voting. Oh, it's not going to let me there. Let's see if I can go back. Well, tried this earlier, so it doesn't look like the voting functionality is working, unfortunately, but we do have some good comments here if anyone wants to expand on kind of addressing some of these conflicting issues or interests. We can kind of think about this in a broader sense as well. Not only between, these social issues between users, but, some of these ecological, maybe these physical issues where we're, running into parking issues. So, thinking about not only the access sites, but also on the river, maybe along the river. What does that look like for kind of addressing these, conflicts? Are there some of these, management concepts, ways that you would move forward with addressing those challenges? Sorry about that. All right, and so we're gonna move along to this last question here. This is kind of one of the big overarching questions that we have. We're taking to each of these workshops, and we want to know, what is the biggest challenge for river recreation management in Montana right now? And so it looks like maybe the voting will be supported in this question. And so if you have, the biggest challenge in mind, what you think is the biggest challenge, not only from a management perspective, maybe something from your personal experience out there recreating, what is that challenge? And then we will be able to, looks like, kind of do a voting crowdsourced piece here as well. So once again, this is it's helpful to kind of keep this in mind in terms of not just the, one system, one watershed, but thinking about the entirety of the state. This process is looking at all rivers across the state of Montana, the diversity of experiences, the diversity of waters, what those look like, those experiences. And so it's really helpful to kind of frame it in that sense of, what is that biggest challenge for every system, not just, just one of those rivers. And I believe you shouldn't have any limits here. So if there are things that are coming to mind that might be, you're bouncing between what is the biggest one, you just feel like including it on there, feel free to add that. If anyone wants to expand on what they've posted here on the page, feel free to raise your hand. Or if you have any questions, feel free to add it to the chat. We give about 30 more seconds here, and then add any additional challenges that you think are facing Montana. What are those biggest challenges? And then we can move on to kind of this the voting portion here, where you'll get 3 voting options. You'll be able to select which ones out of what's posted here on the page, which ones you kind of agree with, what you also feel is one of the biggest challenges.
We have a raised hand from Mike, so I'm going to go ahead and allow him to talk.
Yeah.
Mike, you should be able to unmute.
I think from the responses, what you see is overwhelmingly, it's the continued degradation of rivers, of low water, and habitat. And I know that isn't in the Parks' wheelhouse, but that's the primary issue. And I know managing people is difficult, but we're just witnessing across the state a declining fishery. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you engaging in that conversation. It looks like Trevor also has his hand raised.
Yep, I am. Let's see. Trevor, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, thank you. Just to go along with what Mike said and what Sean said earlier, one of the biggest problems with the low water is not so much the low water in itself. Well, of course it is, but another major problem with it is that then that really pushes everyone together. And then, of course, that frustrates everyone that appears like things are more crowded. For example, here in the Missoula area, we have about 300 plus miles of water that you can float, right? And in June, when nearly every stretch imaginable on the Clark Fork, Blackfoot, and Bitterroot is fishing pretty well to great, and there's plenty of water in all of it, people rarely see each other for the most part. There's sure some stretches that are more crowded, but for the most part, people get away from each other and the rivers do not feel crowded at all. Now, I'm not saying that's realistic year round, but I think one of the big problems that happens right now is when these rivers drop, and of course that's earlier and earlier every year, they run out of water so fast that in terms to go where you can even, not to mention where the good fishing is, but where you can even just get down the river. Like, for example, the canyon of the Blackfoot right now, you can barely even float it, and that's one of the most popular, best stretches of river around. So I think that is another major problem that makes everything feel more crowded. And, at the end all be all, I couldn't agree more with Mike. At the end of the day, this is about the resource, the habitat, the water, and managing that in the future more so than trying to figure out how to manage people. Because, how the people see the experience is going to largely depend on the resource, not so much how the pressure is managed by the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate that input there. As we mentioned, this conversation should be eliciting some responses and ideas. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of keep carrying this conversation as we see some of these inputs on the screen here. And so I'm going to go ahead and head to kind of the voting page here. You'll have 3 votes. Basically, you can vote on what you feel, is the biggest challenge for river recreation management in Montana. If we can always go back and add some pieces to it as well, but and once again, feel free to raise your hand if you have any additional comments. And so give you some time to kind of work through each of those that were put up on the previous screen. You can kind of vote on the ones that you see fit, and then we'll go to kind of the results, and we can have a further in-depth discussion about what those results look like for this group here. And hopefully if you're online, you're able to plug in those votes. I'll give about 30 more seconds. We just want to make sure we leave enough time after the kind of to allow for some further discussion, as well as some question and answer pieces as well, and kind of wrap things up before 7:30. So I'll give you about 30 more seconds here. Great. Well, we'll go ahead and head on to this next screen. We'll kind of take a look at what the results were. So kind of from the group here, it looks like crowding was the most popular, #1 kind of biggest challenge to address. Climate change, some of these low stream flows, specifically too much water drawn away from rivers and feeder creeks. Once again, kind of some low flow, so combination there. We've got some responses down here, a couple votes as well throughout some of these other responses. And so kind of seeing these results, does anyone have any additional kind of comments, any kind of crowdsourced here as a group? Is there any additional comments that anyone has kind of as we work through what these biggest, what this biggest challenge is? I think it's interesting. Crowding was, common theme as well in the last workshop, and what, if anyone wants to expand on what crowding means to them. I know it can be kind of dependent on kind of who you're asking. And so if anyone wants to kind of clarify what that might mean for them, feel free to raise your hand. Once again, yeah, I want to remind everyone just that, all this information will be collected and compiled for the RRAC. That'll be presented and reported to them prior to their in-person meetings in October. And so this information will be compiled as well with the other workshops. So we'll have 3 total workshops. We're having good participation, which is wonderful, and really appreciate everyone's time, hopping on this call, being able to provide your input here through some of this data collection and hearing some of your comments. These are recorded as well, these workshops, and they will be there will be a link to record it. So if you need to go back and kind of see what information was presented, kind of what some of the responses were, you'll have that ability. You can do that through the RRAC webpage as well, through Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And so there will be access to this information and throughout this entire process of the transparency of what information we're collecting, these reports, that'll go out, and you'll also have access to that report as well. So if we don't have any further kind of discussion here on the screen, we could kind of move on to, we have just a couple minutes left here. Don't want to take up any more of your time, but if anyone has any questions or answers we can provide, then we'll go ahead and do that. Oh, my apologies. Sorry, we had one more question. So this is the long-term goal for river recreation. So now I missed a question in there. And so this is going to allow you to identify what is the long-term goal. So we just identified the challenge. And so similar to the last question, we will be able to vote on this as well. And so if you do want to provide your responses here, I apologize for that. I thought I'd reached my questions there. So free to respond here and provide your long-term goal for river recreation management in Montana. And we'll stay on a little bit longer, as myself will. So if you do have any questions after we get through this last question, we'll stick around. So appreciate your participation. And once again, sorry for missing this last question. This was the important one too. Appreciate, all the thoughtfulness going into these responses. As I mentioned before, you should have the ability to input multiple answers here as well. So if you have a couple, feel free to include them. We'll be able to move to the next screen as well and be able to kind of vote on them as well and see the results from that. So feel free to, we'll give about 30 more seconds here and allow you to kind of compile your thoughts and share them here with the group. see a lot of really unique responses here, and it's very, very helpful to see the scope of who we have here on the call as well, here in the workshop. And so give you a little bit more time here if anyone has any last responses to include. All right. We'll go ahead and move on to the voting screen, and feel free to vote on what you feel is the long-term goal, and what has been posted here. So those will be able, you'll be able to see each of those on the voting screen as well. And I know we're just over the 7:30 mark here. And so if anyone does have to leave, I just want to plug that once more, that this information will be collected and compiled for the RAC. The RAC plans to meet in October, 12-member group that'll meet, provide those recommendations to the department about mid-December. And once again, this isn't the last opportunity to voice your provide your public input as well. As we'll have a public comment opportunity for those recommendations, as well as a river recreation survey being deployed, hopefully starting next week. And so just as you were notified, and just stay tuned to the webpage itself. You'll be able to find all the information as we move kind of through this process there, and continue to engage both here with FWP and throughout this process. And once again, I really appreciate everyone's time to sit in on this meeting, hear what you have to say. It's all been very helpful. So thanks. If you do have to take off, I understand. And for those who can stay around, we'll go ahead and take a look at these results from the voting. It's like we got a couple at the top here, protecting stream access laws, and figuring out how to keep these healthy stream flows in the creeks and rivers throughout the year. And so it does seem like it's been a common theme here in this conversation with this group around stream flows and the availability of water within these watersheds. And so you can kind of start to see that being highlighted here in this conversation. So we do have some other votes for a lot of the other options responses as well. I'll kind of try and scroll down to kind of see what these results were. Great. Well, if anyone would like to expand further on any of the questions, any of your responses that you had, any of the information that was presented here this evening, feel free to raise your hand. We'll go ahead and unmute you, and we'll give you a few seconds here if you have any additional questions. And of course, once again, really appreciate your time this evening. Appreciate you being a part of this process as we initiate it. Plenty more to come. And so once again, thank you. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any final questions. And if any staff or anyone else on the call has anything they'd like to add, otherwise we can kind of start to wrap things up. I'm not seeing any raised hands. Once again, thank you again for your time this evening. This is our second of 3 workshops. There is one on Monday. All these workshops are similar in nature, and so it's not necessary to attend each one. Once again, they'll be recorded and posted on the webpage. So if you need to go back and review what was presented, what the questions and the answers were, you'll be able to have that access. So thank you again for being here this evening, and thank you again to the panelists and the presenters, the managers, as well as all of you participants and attendees here this evening. So thank you again, and then we'll conclude this meeting. Have a wonderful evening.